The sharp crack of dried sage beneath her boot was the only sound Zelda Daniels had heard in hours, and she preferred it that way. She knelt beside a patch of wild yarrow in the Texas heat, her fingers working carefully to harvest the delicate white flowers that would stop bleeding better than anything the town doctor kept in his dusty office. The land stretched endlessly around her, brown earth meeting blue sky in a line so straight it could have been drawn with a ruler, and the solitude suited her just fine after 6 years of people telling her she was wasting her talents on plants and potions when she could be finding herself a husband. She was 24 years old in this year of 1878, and she had buried enough people with her remedies clutched in their cold hands to know that her work mattered more than matching linens and learning to simper at church socials. Her mother had died when Zelda was 18, leaving her with a trunk full of journals detailing every plant that grew in southern Texas, and a warning to never let a man make her feel small for being smart. Her father had followed 2 years later, his heart giving out one summer morning, and Zelda had been alone ever since, walking the wild places around Del Rio and gathering the healing things that grew there. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, one hand instinctively moving to the knife she kept strapped to her thigh beneath her split riding skirt. A single rider approached from the east, his horse moving at an easy lope that kicked up small clouds of dust. She stood slowly, her canvas gathering bag hanging heavy at her side, and waited. Running would be pointless out here, and besides, she could see now that the rider sat his horse like a working cowboy, not an outlaw. His hat was pulled low against the sun, but she could make out broad shoulders and long legs in worn denim. He slowed when he was still a respectful distance away, raising one hand in greeting. "Afternoon, miss. Did not mean to startle you." His voice was deep and carried easily across the open ground. Zelda relaxed slightly but kept her expression neutral. "You are on open range. No law against riding it." The cowboy brought his horse closer, and she got her first good look at him. He was young, probably not more than 26 or 27, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. A few days of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his clothes were dusty from hard riding, but he sat straight in the saddle with the easy confidence of a man who spent more time with horses than people. Something about the set of his mouth made him look lonely, though Zelda could not have said exactly why she thought so. "Name is Blake Henderson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I work for the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of Del Rio. I know the place." Zelda shifted her bag to her other shoulder. "I am Zelda Daniels. I supply herbs and remedies to the general store in town." "I know." Blake's mouth quirked in what might have been the start of a smile. "Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house swears by your headache powder. Says it is the only thing that helps when her skull feels like it is splitting open." Zelda felt an unwelcome flutter of pleasure at the praise but pushed it aside. "Was there something you needed, Mr. Henderson? I have more ground to cover before dark." He looked away then, his gaze fixed on the horizon, and she saw his jaw tighten. When he looked back at her, something raw and honest showed in those creek water eyes. "This is going to sound foolish. Most things do before you say them." That earned her a real smile, brief but genuine. "Fair enough. The truth is, I saw you heading out this morning when I was riding into town for supplies, and I found myself following your trail without really meaning to. Been working cattle for 3 months straight without a day off, sleeping on the ground, talking to nothing but cows and a couple of ranch hands who only want to discuss poker and women. When I saw you out here, alone but not looking lonely, I thought maybe you might have a remedy for that." Zelda stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide if he was mocking her or if the loneliness in his eyes was as real as it looked. A remedy for loneliness. I know it is not the kind of thing you can fix with herbs. Blake shifted in his saddle, and his horse took a few steps forward. But I was hoping maybe you would not mind some company while you work, just for conversation. Get so a man forgets how to talk to people who might actually answer back with something interesting. She should have said no. Every sensible part of her brain screamed that letting a strange cowboy ride along while she worked was asking for trouble. But the honest way he looked at her, the way he had admitted to loneliness without trying to hide it behind swagger or whiskey courage, made her pause. And if she was being honest with herself, she had been lonely too, even if she told herself she preferred solitude. I suppose I cannot stop you from riding the same direction I am walking, she said finally. But if you are looking for entertaining conversation, you will be disappointed. I mostly think about plants. That sounds better than thinking about cattle, which is what I have been doing for months. Blake dismounted in one smooth motion, leading his horse by the reins. What are you gathering today? Yarrow for wounds, sage for fever, and if I am lucky, some wild columbine for my cough syrup. The columbine is tricky though, does not grow many places around here. She started walking, heading toward a rocky outcropping where she sometimes found the plants she needed. Blake fell into step beside her, his horse following placidly behind. You learned all this from books, he asked. From my mother mostly. She learned from her mother, going back 4 generations of women who knew how to coax healing from the land. Zelda kept her eyes on the ground as she walked, automatically cataloging every plant they passed. The books helped me identify new things and understand why certain remedies work, but the real knowledge came from her journals. She spent 30 years documenting everything that grew within a day's ride of Del Rio. That is something, Blake said quietly. My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days, and there was nothing anyone could do. Maybe if someone like you had been around then with your remedies, she might have lived. Zelda glanced at him and saw grief worn smooth by time, the kind that never quite left but learned to coexist with everything else. Maybe, or maybe not. I am not a miracle worker, Mr. Henderson. I have lost people too, even with all my mother's knowledge and my own learning. Sometimes the body just gives up and no amount of herbs can call it back. Blake, he said, if we are going to be walking together, might as well use first names, and I know you are not a miracle worker. But I bet you have saved some people too. A few, she admitted. Enough to make it worthwhile. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the sun beating down on them with the relentless heat of a Texas afternoon. Zelda found herself stealing glances at Blake when she thought he was not looking. He moved with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle, but his hands, when he paused to adjust his horse's bridle, were gentle and patient. She noticed the way his eyes tracked over the landscape, not with the hungry assessment of someone looking to take from the land, but with simple appreciation for its harsh beauty. You are from around here, she asked, breaking the silence. Born in San Antonio, but I have been drifting since I was 16. Worked ranches all over Texas and up into New Mexico territory for a while. The double R is the longest I have stayed anywhere since I left home. He paused, then added, started to feel like I was always looking for something but never finding it. Figured maybe I was just meant to keep moving. What changed? Why stay at the double R? Blake was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, got tired of running, I guess. Started to realize that maybe the thing I was looking for was not a place but a reason to stay in one. Have not found that reason yet, but I figured I should at least stop long enough to look properly. Something about the way he said it made Zelda's heart beat a little faster. She pushed the feeling aside and focused on the plants, kneeling beside a cluster of sage to harvest the leaves. Blake crouched beside her, watching her hands work. "You have to take only what you need," she explained, falling into the familiar rhythm of teaching. "Leave enough for the plant to keep growing and always leave some for the animals that depend on it. My mother used to say that the land will give you what you need if you treat it with respect, but it will punish greed every time." Smart woman. She was. Zelda tucked the sage into her bag and stood. "She also used to say that loneliness was just the heart's way of telling you it was time to open yourself up to something new, but I always thought that was romanticized nonsense." Blake stood too, and when she looked up at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Maybe it is not nonsense. Maybe she was onto something. Or maybe loneliness is just what happens when you spend too much time with cattle, Zelda said, trying to keep her tone light even as something warm and unfamiliar unfolded in her chest. He laughed at that, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "You might be right about that. Though I think even if I worked with the most interesting people in the world, I would still feel lonely if I did not have anyone who really knew me. Someone I could be honest with, without putting on the face everyone expects to see." They kept walking, and as the afternoon stretched toward evening, Zelda found herself talking more than she had in months. She told Blake about her father's quiet grief after her mother died, how he had simply seemed to fade away day by day until his heart finally stopped. She told him about the satisfaction of mixing a remedy that actually worked, of seeing someone recover from illness and knowing she had helped. She told him about the loneliness of being different in a town where most women her age were married with children, about the whispers that called her strange and unwomanly for preferring plants to people. Blake listened to all of it without judgment, nodding in the right places, asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. In turn, he told her about growing up the youngest of 5 boys, about how he had always felt like he was trying to catch up to his brother's accomplishments. He told her about the restlessness that had driven him from home, the need to prove himself on his own terms rather than living in anyone's shadow. He told her about the nights under the stars that felt endless and empty, about waking up and wondering if this was all his life would ever be. "Do you ever regret it?" Zelda asked as they made their way back toward Del Rio, the sun hanging low and orange on the horizon. "Leaving your family, striking out on your own?" Blake considered the question seriously. "No. I needed to do it, needed to find out who I was when I was not somebody's little brother. But I think I took it too far, pushed everyone away so completely that I forgot how to let people in again. Got so used to being alone that it started to feel normal, and that is when it became a problem. Because being alone is different from being lonely." "Exactly." He looked at her then, and the setting sun turned his eyes to gold. "You understand that. I could tell from the first moment I saw you today. You choose to be alone sometimes, but you are not lonely the way I am. You are comfortable with yourself." "Most days," Zelda admitted, "but not all of them. Sometimes I wonder if I am using my work as an excuse to avoid risking my heart. Easier to focus on plants than on people who might hurt you or leave you or die on you." "Safer," Blake agreed. "But maybe not better." They reached the edge of Del Rio as the last light was draining from the sky, and Zelda realized with a start that they had been together for nearly 6 hours. It had felt like less than one. Blake walked her all the way to the small house she kept on the southern edge of town, a modest structure with a large garden plot behind it where she grew her most important medicinal plants. "Thank you for the company," he said, still holding his horse's reins. "I know I invited myself along, but I appreciate you letting me stay." It was not terrible, Zelda said, and was rewarded with another one of those rare smiles. Actually, it was nice. I did not realize how much I missed just talking to someone until today. Could I come by again? Maybe help with your garden or carry your heavy bags or something useful like that. Blake's voice was casual, but she could see the hope in his eyes. I promise I am good for more than just conversation. Handy with tools, decent at building things, and I know my way around plants well enough to tell a weed from something valuable. Zelda knew she should be cautious, should not let this cowboy with his lonely eyes and easy smile get too close too fast. But standing there in the gathering dark, she found she did not want to go back to her empty house and her solitary routine. I usually work in the garden on Sundays when I am not riding out to gather wild plants. If you are not working, you could come by then. I will be here, Blake promised. Thank you, Zelda. The way he said her name made her shiver despite the lingering heat. She watched him mount his horse and ride off into the darkness, then stood there for a long moment before finally going inside. The house felt emptier than usual that night, and she caught herself smiling for no reason as she prepared her supper and sorted through the plants she had gathered. Sunday came with cloud cover that provided blessed relief from the usual brutal sun, and Zelda was in her garden by dawn, turning soil and pulling weeds from around her feverfew plants. She told herself she was not watching the road for a rider, was not listening for hoofbeats over the sound of her own breathing. But when Blake appeared just after sunrise, leading his horse and carrying a canteen and a bundle wrapped in cloth, her heart did a ridiculous leap in her chest. "Morning," he called out, tying his horse to the fence post. "Brought some biscuits from the ranch cook. Thought you might not have eaten yet." "I have not," Zelda admitted, sitting back on her heels and pushing a strand of dark hair out of her face. "Thank you." They ate together sitting on the edge of her porch, the biscuits still warm and surprisingly good. Blake had also brought butter and honey, and they ate in comfortable silence while the world woke up around them. After breakfast, he helped her in the garden without needing much instruction, his hands sure and steady as he followed her lead. He was not afraid of getting dirty, she noticed, and he treated her plants with the same gentle respect she did. As they worked, they talked about everything and nothing. He told her stories about life on the ranch, about the cranky foreman who was actually a decent man under all his bluster, about the cook who made biscuits like they were art. She told him about the people who came to her for remedies, the shy way most of them approached her as if asking for help was something to be ashamed of. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and hated the taste of licorice. They both had a tendency to wake before dawn and found the early morning hours the best part of the day. They both felt most at peace when they were outside, under open sky. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt natural as breathing. Blake would ride into town on his days off, sometimes just for an hour or two, sometimes for the entire day. They would work together in her garden or ride out into the wild country to gather plants. He learned to identify dozens of healing herbs and became skilled at spotting the subtle differences between similar-looking species. She learned that he could make her laugh with dry observations about human nature, and that his seemingly quiet demeanor hid a sharp intelligence and a kinder heart than most men she had known. In early September, a little girl from town fell from a tree and broke her arm. The doctor was away visiting family in Austin, and the girl's mother brought her to Zelda in a panic. Blake happened to be there, and he held the girl steady while Zelda set the bone, talking to her in a low, calm voice that helped keep her from screaming. Afterward, when the girl was resting with her arm splinted and wrapped, her mother crying with relief, Blake helped Zelda clean up. "You were good with her," Zelda said, washing blood off her hands in the basin. Do you like children? Never thought much about it either way, but I suppose I do. That little one was brave, reminded me of my youngest niece. She is about that age now, or would be, have not seen her in years. A shadow crossed his face. Have not seen any of my family in years, come to think of it. Do you miss them? More than I expected to, Blake admitted. When I left, I was so focused on getting away and making my own path that I did not think about what I was giving up. Now I wonder if they even think about me anymore, or if I have been gone so long I am just a memory. Zelda dried her hands and turned to face him. You could write to them. Let them know you are well, that you think of them. Would not know what to say after all this time. How do you explain 6 years of silence? You start with the truth. Tell them you were lost and now you are finding your way back. Tell them you are sorry it took so long. She reached out without thinking and touched his arm. Tell them you want to be part of their lives again if they will have you. Blake looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, and something shifted in the air between them. When did you get so wise? I am not wise. I am just good at telling other people what to do while ignoring my own advice. What advice are you ignoring? Zelda pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. The part about opening yourself up to new things, letting people in, taking risks even when you are scared. Are you scared? Blake's voice had gone soft, and he took a step closer. Of me, not of you, of this. She gestured between them, trying to find words for the feeling that had been growing steadily since that first day in the wild country, of caring about someone who might leave, of letting myself want something I might not get to keep. Zelda. He said her name like a prayer. I am not going anywhere, not unless you tell me to go. You are a drifter, Blake. You said so yourself. 6 years of moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. What is going to stop you from drifting away from here, from me, when the restlessness comes back? He was quiet for a long moment, his creek water eyes searching her face. You want the truth. Nothing was stopping me. A month ago, if you had asked me where I would be next year, I would have shrugged and said probably some other ranch in some other town. But that was before. Before what? Before you. Before I remembered what it felt like to have someone to talk to who actually understood what I was saying. Before I had a reason to wake up excited about the day ahead, because I knew I might get to see you. Before I realized that the thing I had been searching for all these years was not adventure or freedom or proving something to myself. It was connection. It was finding one person who made me want to stay. Zelda's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Blake, you barely know me. We have spent, what, a dozen days together. That is not enough time to make that kind of decision. How much time is enough? A year? 5 years? Forever. He took another step closer, and now they were barely a hand's width apart. I know that when I am with you, I feel like myself in a way I have not felt since I was a boy. I know that you are smart and strong and kind, that you have dedicated your life to healing people even when they do not appreciate it, that you would rather spend a day in the dirt gathering plants than an hour at a social putting on airs. I know that your smile makes my chest ache, and that I think about you every minute I am not with you. If that is not enough to know, then tell me what else I need to learn. You need to know that I am difficult, Zelda said, her voice shaking. That I am stubborn and independent, and I do not like being told what to do. You need to know that my work will always be important to me, and that I will never be the kind of woman who stays home and has nothing to talk about except recipes and gossip. You need to know that I am terrified of losing people I love, and I will probably push you away sometimes just to see if you will come back. I will come back, Blake said simply. Every time, for as long as you will have me. And then he was kissing her, his hands cupping her face with a gentleness that made her want to cry. She kissed him back, all the loneliness and longing of the past 6 years pouring into that single moment of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Zelda felt like the world had shifted beneath her feet and would never be quite the same again. "This is crazy," she whispered against his mouth. "Probably," Blake agreed, "but I have been called crazy before, never bothered me much." They stood there holding each other as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, and Zelda felt something inside her that had been locked tight for years finally begin to open. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, and when Blake kissed her again, she let herself fall into it without reservation. The months that followed were the happiest Zelda could remember. Blake kept his promise about not going anywhere, taking on extra work at the Double R to save money and spending every free moment with her. They became a familiar sight around Del Rio, the herbalist and the cowboy, always together, always talking and laughing. Some of the older women clucked their tongues and said it was not proper for an unmarried woman to spend so much time alone with a man, but Zelda found she did not care what they thought. For the first time in her life, she was genuinely happy, and she was not about to give that up for the sake of other people's expectations. Blake proved to be an eager student of herbalism, learning the properties of different plants and helping her prepare remedies. He had a natural talent for the work, his patient hands and careful attention to detail serving him well. Together, they expanded her garden, building raised beds for the more delicate plants and constructing a small greenhouse where they could grow things year-round. He also helped her improve her distillation setup, using his knowledge of ranch mechanics to create a more efficient system for making tinctures and essential oils. In November, a letter arrived for Blake from his eldest brother in San Antonio. Blake had finally taken Zelda's advice and written to his family, and the response had been overwhelming. All four of his brothers and his elderly father had written back immediately, their letters full of joy and relief that he was alive and well. His brother Matthew, the oldest, wanted to know everything about Blake's life now and extended an invitation to visit the family ranch anytime he wanted. "They want to meet you," Blake said, looking up from the letter with wonder in his eyes. "Matthew says the whole family has been asking about the herbalist who finally got me to settle down." "I did not get you to settle down. You made that choice yourself." But Zelda was pleased nonetheless. "Do you want to go visit them?" "Not without you. Will you come with me?" "I know it is asking a lot, taking time away from your work and traveling all the way to San Antonio, but it would mean everything to me if you would come." Zelda thought about her garden and her patients and all the reasons she should say no. Then she looked at Blake's hopeful face and found herself saying yes instead. They made plans to travel to San Antonio in December, after the first frost had killed off most of the plants she needed to harvest, and before the busy season of winter colds and illnesses began. The journey took 3 days by horse, and Zelda had never been so far from Del Rio in her life. Blake was attentive and careful with her, making sure she was comfortable at night when they camped and pointing out interesting sights along the way. They talked endlessly, as they always did, but there was a new intimacy to their conversations now. They talked about the future in concrete terms, about dreams that involved both of them. Blake spoke about wanting his own small ranch someday, a place where he could raise horses and Zelda could grow her medicinal plants on a larger scale. She found herself talking about things she had never dared voice before, about wanting a family and a partner to share her life with, about being tired of always facing the world alone. Blake's family ranch was larger than Zelda had expected, a sprawling property with a main house and several outbuildings. His father, Harold Henderson, was a spry man in his 60s with Blake's eyes and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the Texas sun. His brothers were all older versions of Blake, tall and broad-shouldered, with easy smiles and the kind of roughhousing affection that spoke of deep bonds. They welcomed Zelda like she was already family, their wives and children swarming around her with questions about her herbalist work and life in Del Rio. "You are good for him," Matthew told her on the second day of their visit. They were sitting on the porch watching Blake play with his nieces and nephews in the yard. "I have never seen him look so settled, so content. Whatever you did, thank you." "I did not do anything except be myself," Zelda said. "Blake is the one who chose to change his life." "Maybe. But we all need a reason to change, something worth staying for. You are his reason. Anyone can see that." Matthew paused, then added, "He is planning to propose, you know. Asked Father for our mother's ring last night. Wanted the family's blessing before he did it official." Zelda's heart stuttered. "He told you that?" "Did not have to. I know my little brother. He has got that look about him, that determination. Just wanted to give you fair warning in case you needed time to think about your answer." Matthew stood and stretched. "For what it is worth, I think you will say yes. You have got the same look he does." That night, Blake took Zelda on a walk through the ranch property, the winter stars bright and cold overhead. They ended up at a small pond where he said he used to come as a boy when he needed to think. The water reflected the moonlight like scattered diamonds, and the silence was broken only by the occasional call of a night bird. "I have been thinking a lot about the future lately," Blake said, taking both her hands in his. "About what I want my life to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And in every version of that future I imagine, you are there beside me." "Blake," Zelda started, but he shook his head. "Let me say this while I have the courage. I know we have only known each other for 5 months. I know it is fast, and I know you have got every reason to be cautious. But I also know that I love you, Zelda Daniels. I love your strength and your intelligence and the way you care for people who cannot care for themselves. I love the way you look at the world like it is full of puzzles worth solving. I love that you make me want to be better than I am. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I mean it." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small emerald that caught the moonlight. "This was my mother's. She gave it to my father when she agreed to marry him because they were too poor for him to buy her a proper ring. He has kept it safe all these years, and now he wants you to have it if you will take it, if you will take me." Zelda looked at the ring, then at Blake's face, so open and hopeful in the moonlight. She thought about all the years she had spent alone, telling herself she was fine, that she did not need anyone. She thought about the emptiness that had lived in her chest for so long she had forgotten it was there, until Blake came along and filled it without even trying. She thought about the future, about building a life with this man who had ridden up to her one day and asked for a remedy for loneliness. "Yes," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Yes, I will marry you, Blake Henderson. I will take you and your mother's ring and whatever future we can build together." His whoop of joy startled birds from the nearby trees, and then he was spinning her around, both of them laughing like children. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They sealed the promise with a kiss that turned heated, hands tangling in each other's hair, breathless murmurs of love and want. When they finally made their way back to the main house, disheveled and grinning, Blake's entire family was waiting on the porch with whoops and applause. They were married in Del Rio on a warm day in late February, with half the town in attendance despite Zelda's initial desire for a small ceremony. The local preacher performed the service in the small church, and Blake's entire family made the journey to attend. Zelda wore a simple cream-colored dress that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her frame, and carried a bouquet of wild sage and columbine. Blake wore his best shirt and a new pair of boots, his hair slicked back and his face clean-shaven. When he saw her walking toward him down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears he did not bother to hide. "I, Blake Henderson, take you, Zelda Daniels, to be my wife," he said when it was time for the vows, his voice ringing clear through the church. "I promise to love you and honor you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your work and your dreams. I promise to make you laugh when you are sad, to hold you when you are scared, and to remind you how extraordinary you are whenever you forget. I promise to choose you every day for as long as I live." Zelda's own vows were shorter but no less heartfelt. "I, Zelda Daniels, take you, Blake Henderson, to be my husband. I promise to love you fiercely and honestly. I promise to share my life with you, the good days and the hard ones. I promise to trust you with my heart, even when it scares me. I promise to build a life with you worth living, full of purpose and joy and all the things we have both been searching for. I promise to choose you always." The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Blake's family had brought gifts, practical things like cookware and linens, but also a beautiful carved wooden box from his father that contained all of his mother's herbalism journals. "She would want you to have these," Harold said gruffly, pressing the box into Zelda's hands. "She was a healer too in her own way. You remind me of her." As the party wound down and guests began to drift home, Blake and Zelda slipped away to the small house that was now theirs together. Blake had spent the last month making improvements, adding a room and fixing the roof and building more shelves for Zelda's ever-growing collection of dried herbs and reference books. He carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests that it was a silly tradition. And then they were alone, truly alone as husband and wife for the first time. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with the reverent attention of cartographers mapping new territory. Blake was gentle and patient, making sure Zelda was comfortable, whispering endearments against her skin. She discovered that he was ticklish along his ribs and that he made the most wonderful sounds when she kissed his throat. They fell asleep tangled together. The window opened to let in the cool night air, and Zelda felt a peace she had never known before. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment, learning to share space and make decisions together. They had minor arguments about silly things, like how to organize the kitchen and whether they needed 3 different kinds of knives or just one good one. But they worked through each disagreement with honest conversation, and Zelda found that making up was often the best part of fighting. Blake continued working at the Double R, but he also began training horses on the side, a skill that proved lucrative. Zelda's remedies became more sought after as word spread about her skill, and she began teaching other women in town some basic herbalism so they could care for their families. In the summer of 1879, Zelda realized she was pregnant. She had missed her monthly courses and felt queasy in the mornings, and when she examined herself with the clinical eye she used on her patients, the signs were undeniable. She told Blake one evening as they sat in the garden, watching the sun set over the wild country they both loved. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, and watched his face transform with joy. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing out the word. "Our baby. Zelda, that is wonderful. That is the best news I have ever heard." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Are you happy? I know we did not plan this so soon." "I am terrified," Zelda admitted. "And yes, I am happy. So happy I do not quite know what to do with it." Their son was born in late February of 1880, during a rare snowstorm that blanketed Del Rio in white. The labor was long and difficult, but Blake stayed by Zelda's side the entire time, holding her hand and telling her she was strong enough to do this. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Blake cut the cord with shaking hands and placed the baby on Zelda's chest with reverent gentleness. "He is perfect," Blake whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You did it. You are amazing." They named him Thomas, after Zelda's father, and he had Blake's creek water eyes and Zelda's dark hair. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs and a tendency to wake at odd hours, and both his parents fell completely in love with him. Blake proved to be a devoted father, walking the floors with Thomas at night so Zelda could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, and talking to the baby about everything from horses to herbs as if Thomas could understand every word. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic but rich with purpose. Blake's horse training business grew, and he eventually left the Double R to work for himself full-time. They bought a piece of land just outside Del Rio, 5 acres with good soil and access to water, and built a small ranch house with room for Zelda's expanded herb garden and Blake's training corrals. They worked side by side every day, building the life they had dreamed about during those long conversations in the early days of their courtship. 2 years later, their daughter was born during a spring thunderstorm. They named her Clara, and she had her father's easy smile and her mother's sharp intelligence. She was followed 2 years after that by another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful from the moment he was born. Their house was always full of noise and laughter, children running through the garden, Blake teaching Thomas how to ride while Zelda showed Clara how to identify different healing plants. The years passed in a blur of happy memories. Blake's brothers visited often with their families, and the cousins grew up together during long summer stays at the Henderson Ranch. Zelda trained several young women in Del Rio as herbalists, passing on her mother's knowledge to a new generation. Blake's horses gained a reputation for being well-trained and reliable, and he had more business than he could handle. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake took Zelda back to the spot where they had first met, that patch of wild country where she had been gathering yarrow and he had ridden up asking for a remedy for loneliness. They left the children with Blake's visiting family and rode out alone for the first time in months. "You remember what you thought when you saw me that day?" Blake asked, dismounting and helping Zelda down from her horse. "I thought you were either very brave or very foolish to approach a woman alone in the wilderness." Zelda smiled at the memory. "I had my hand on my knife the entire time we talked that first day. I know, I saw." Blake pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "What changed your mind? What made you decide I was not a threat?" "The way you admitted to being lonely. Most men would rather die than admit to needing anything, especially not something as intangible as companionship. But you were honest about it, and that honesty made me trust you." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that 10 years and 3 children had etched there. "Best decision I ever made, trusting you that day." "Second best," Blake corrected. "The best decision was saying yes when I asked you to marry me. That was not a decision. That was my heart making the choice before my brain could talk me out of it." Zelda laughed. "But you are right. Best decision of my life." They spread a blanket on the ground and lay side by side, watching clouds drift across the endless Texas sky. It was peaceful in the way only the wild country could be, silent except for the wind and the distant call of birds. Blake reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years together. "I love you," he said quietly. "More now than I did 10 years ago, which I did not think was possible. You have given me everything I did not even know I was looking for. A home, a family, a purpose. A life worth living. You gave me the same things," Zelda replied. "I thought I was fine being alone, but I was really just protecting myself from being hurt. You taught me that some risks are worth taking, that opening your heart to someone is not weakness but the bravest thing you can do." They stayed there for hours, talking and laughing and remembering all the moments that had led them to this place. When they finally rode home as the sun was setting, Zelda felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt that first day, the recognition that this man beside her was something special, someone worth keeping. The years continued to unfold with their share of joys and sorrows. Blake's father passed away peacefully in his sleep when Thomas was 8, and the whole family gathered to mourn and celebrate a life well lived. One of Blake's brothers lost his ranch to debt and moved his family to California to start over. Zelda treated her share of patients who could not be saved, including a young mother whose death hit her particularly hard. But through all of it, Blake was there, steady and supportive, reminding her that she could not save everyone and that her best was good enough. Their children grew into remarkable people. Thomas followed his father into horse training and showed a natural gift for it that surpassed even Blake's skill. Clara became fascinated with plants like her mother but wanted to study them scientifically, talking about going to a university back east to learn proper botany. James discovered a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the plants and animals around their ranch with meticulous detail. Blake and Zelda encouraged all of their interests, determined that their children would have the freedom to choose their own paths. When Thomas was 18 and preparing to start his own horse ranch with a partner from a neighboring property, Zelda and Blake found themselves alone in their house for the first time in nearly 2 decades. Clara had left for Philadelphia to attend a women's college, and James was apprenticed to an artist in San Antonio. The silence was strange at first, almost uncomfortable. "It is too quiet," Blake said one evening as they ate dinner at the table that had once required extra benches to hold their entire family. "I miss the chaos." "I miss it too," Zelda admitted, "but I am also glad we have this time together. Feels like we are coming full circle, back to when it was just the two of us." "Except now we are old and creaky," Blake said with a laugh. He was 46 now, with silver threading through his brown hair and permanent laugh lines around his eyes. "Speak for yourself. I am perfectly spry." Zelda was 44 and still worked in her garden every day, though she had trained 2 younger women to take over most of the more physically demanding aspects of her herbalism practice. Besides, old just means we have survived long enough to accumulate wisdom. If wisdom means knowing how lucky I am to have you, then I suppose I am very wise indeed. Blake reached across the table for her hand. "Have I told you lately that you are the love of my life? Not today. Better say it again just to be sure." But Zelda was smiling, that same smile that had captivated Blake all those years ago. They fell back into the rhythms of their early marriage, taking long rides into the wild country, working side by side in the garden, staying up late talking about everything and nothing. Zelda wrote a book compiling her mother's knowledge with her own observations, and Blake helped her organize and edit it. The book was eventually published by a small press in Austin and became a valued resource for healers throughout Texas. Their children came home often with their own families as the years went on. Thomas married a rancher's daughter and gave them 3 grandchildren who loved spending summers at their grandparents' ranch. Clara returned from Philadelphia with a degree in botany and a passion for plant conservation, eventually establishing a botanical garden in San Antonio that attracted visitors from all over the state. James moved to New York to pursue art, but came home every Christmas with new sketches and paintings of the wild Texas landscape he had never stopped loving. Blake and Zelda grew old together with grace, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Blake gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I was 26 years old and more lost than I cared to admit when I saw a woman gathering plants alone in the wild country. I rode up to her and asked for a remedy for loneliness, not really expecting her to have an answer. But she did. The remedy was her. It was opening myself up to the possibility of love, of partnership, of building a life with someone who saw me for who I really was and chose me anyway. Zelda, you have been my remedy for everything that ever ailed me. You have been my home and my adventure, my peace and my passion. Here is to 30 more years if we are lucky enough to get them." They did not get 30 more years, but they got 15, which felt like a gift. Blake passed away peacefully at the age of 71, his hand in Zelda's, surrounded by his family. He had lived a good life, full of love and purpose, and he faced death with the same honest courage he had shown that first day when he admitted to being lonely. Zelda mourned him deeply, but not hopelessly. She had too many good memories, too much gratitude for the life they had shared, to succumb to despair. She continued her herbalism work, now training her great-grandchildren in the knowledge that had been passed down through generations. She took long walks in the wild country where she and Blake had first met, feeling his presence in the wind and the endless sky. When Zelda was 80 years old, she gathered her family around her and told them stories about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had ridden up to a lonely herbalist and changed both their lives forever. She told them about the importance of honesty and courage, about choosing love even when it was scary, about building a life that mattered. "Your grandfather asked me once for a remedy for loneliness," she said, her voice still strong despite her years. "I did not understand then that the best remedy for loneliness is not something you can make from plants or mix in a bottle. It is connection. It is finding someone who sees you truly and loves you anyway. It is opening yourself up to the possibility that life can be better with someone else in it than it ever could be alone." She passed away in her sleep a few months later, the journal her mother had given her clutched to her chest and Blake's ring still on her finger after 60 years. Her children buried her next to Blake under a cottonwood tree on their ranch with a headstone that reads simply, "Zelda Daniels Henderson, healer, teacher, beloved wife and mother, she was the remedy." In the end, the story of the herbalist and the cowboy became one of those tales that gets told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a simple request and the courage to say yes to something new. Their descendants carried on their work, training horses and growing healing plants, passing down not just skills but the values that had made Blake and Zelda's love so remarkable. And in the wild country around Del Rio, yarrow and sage still grew in abundance, waiting for someone with knowledge and patience to discover their healing properties, just as Zelda had done so many years before, alone until she was not, searching until she was found.